everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be wrapping up all of the books that I read in March. I have 16 books to talk to you about, so I am going to try and be quite brief with these little mini reviews of everything I read. I know everyone is feeling this at the moment, but it feels like March lasted forever. Like, I think about the books that I read at the start of the month and it feels like such a long time ago. I do feel like moving into April is going to be like a little bit of a reset for my head, both in terms of like my broader life, but also in terms of my reading. That's not to say I didn't enjoy my reading in March. Like, I read 2, maybe 3 books that are serious contenders for my favourite books of the year. And of course it was the Irish Readathon, and I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who participated and supported the Readathon. It's such a passion project for myself, Aoife and Elaine, and I love seeing everyone's TBRs and posts on Instagram. So a huge thank you for that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, towards the end of the month, because the month felt like it had gone on for so long. I don't know what I'm trying to say. My brain just needs a bit of a reset, I think. I don't have all of the books that I read with me because when this whole pandemic thing started happening, I decided rather than to spend it in my house share, I would spend it back in Dublin with my mum, and I prioritised taking books that I hadn't read yet. So I don't have all of the books I read, unfortunately. I do like being able to like properly show you guys the books that I've read. But anyways, that doesn't really matter. I am going to kick it off by talking about 3 books that I read this month that I absolutely loved. These are the 3 books that could quite possibly, and I think is quite likely, to be on my favourite books of the year list. The first of those books is a non-fiction book called Don't Touch My Hair by Emma Dabiri. This is a book that is all about black hairstyles. I've read a few books that are about like the experiences of black women in particular and their relationships to their hair, but this book was so different to a lot of those books that I'd read before. It was so thoroughly well researched. It really went into the science behind different hairstyles and caring for different hairstyles, and it also went into like the social and cultural histories, talked about experiences from across the globe, but it also very much toned in on Emma's experiences of being a mixed race girl in Ireland. I actually listened to this one on audiobook and I wish I had a physical copy of it because there was so much that I wanted to like highlight and mark up because I learned so much from this book. For the past couple years, I've kind of considered myself someone who is fairly clued up on this kind of stuff. And this book just highlighted to me how blinded by my privilege I was, because there was so much that I didn't know. I cannot recommend this book enough. I think it's phenomenal. Another one of my favourites from this month was Tender by Belinda McKeown. This is a book that is set in the 90s in Dublin. It follows the very intense friendship between Catherine and James and how the boundaries in their relationship begin to blur, how their obsession with one another becomes quite unhealthy. The comparison that drew me to reading this book, but if you like Normal People by Sally Rooney, which I will be talking about later in this wrap up as a reread, then you will absolutely love this book. It is the same kind of slightly pretentious Dublin setting with 2 people who just have dreadful communication skills and the most intense, confusing emotions. I don't really want to say much more than that, but one of the other things that I thought was really fantastically done in this book was its discussion of what it was like being queer in Ireland in the 90s. Plays a really significant role in this book and why their friendship is so complicated. This book is just compulsively readable. Like, when I was reading when I was on my commute, remember commuting, I did not want to stop and I did not want to put this book down. It's fantastic. I was so sure that was going to be my favourite book of the month until I read Promising Young Women by Caroline O'Donoghue. This might be one of my favourite books ever. This book is about Jane, who is an adrift woman in her mid-20s, so of course I was gonna like this book. Jane has just had a breakup and she's grappling with her feelings about that. She's also really struggling with her career in not really knowing how to get to the next level of it. But what happens in her life next is she finds herself becoming the other woman in an affair with one of her bosses. She essentially becomes like his dirty little secret. The web that he weaves around her to ensure that even if she speaks up about the damage he is doing to her, even if she speaks up, even if people believe her, she's still gonna be in trouble and he will still be fine. Like, that's the web that he weaves throughout the entirety of their damaging relationship. And this book just made me so angry. Not like angry at the book, but like angry at this character that he felt so real. There are definitely a significant number of men out there who are in positions of power and abuse that position of power. And it leads Jane down this spiral where she isn't taking care of herself in any way. You know, she isn't eating properly, her hair starts falling out, and her relationship with alcohol becomes very dangerous. And all of these toxic behaviours are things that he very subtly encourages in her. As we follow Jane from someone who is not doing well after a breakup and going through like the kind of typical experiences of that, to the very dangerous position she finds herself in, you empathize with her and relate to her in so many ways. And I underlined so much in this book, and I don't really underline stuff in books, but I loved it so much. My one gripe with it, however, is that she does mention watching Legally Blonde 3, which isn't out until May. You could have just said Legally Blonde or Legally Blonde 2. There isn't a Legally Blonde 3 yet. But that's a minor quibble. When I finished reading this book, I immediately wanted to read it again, which it's not an experience that I ever have with books. I loved this one so much. I'm now going to move on to the two books that I read for slightly younger readers, starting with Bank by Emma Quigley. I thought this was a really good middle grade book. It essentially follows like this group of kids as they start up a bank at their school. So other students in their school have like ideas for business ventures, and these kids essentially give them like startup loans and charge interest. It's a really fast-paced book. It is really funny, and it has this underlying theme about the financial crash in Ireland. And we see that through the eyes of our main character as we look at his reaction to his dad losing his job, them suddenly not being able to afford things that he took for granted before. And it's really interesting, that kind of microcosmic bank at the school going on alongside that larger societal issue. What I loved about this book was like the dynamic in the school. Like, it took me right back to my secondary school days, which I definitely don't want to go back to, but this kind of reminded me of some of the slightly more enjoyable moments. The other middle grade book that I read in March was Brilliant by Roddy Doyle, and it was really fun to read these two books quite close to reading one another, because they both have that underlying theme of the financial crash in Ireland. So Brilliant is about these two kids that overhear their parents talking about their uncle. And what they say about the uncle is the black dog has got him. Their uncle ends up moving in with them because he can't afford his house anymore. And when you read this as an adult, what you know is that the uncle has lost his job, he doesn't have any money, and he's suffering from depression. But the kids take this really literally, and they decide that they are going to go out on the streets of Dublin and find this damn dog. And along the way, they find other kids who are trying to do the same thing. And also the animals of Dublin Zoo get involved as well. It is so much fun, such a cozy adventure. I really loved it being on the streets of Dublin because they're, streets that I know very well. And I just found it really interesting in both of these books to see that issue through children's eyes. I thought it was really fantastic, and if you've read any Roddy Doyle before, you will know he is so funny, and this book is hilarious as well. I already told you guys about one non-fiction book that I read in March, but I'm now going to tell you about the second one of those. And if you watched my reading vlog that I uploaded, you will have already seen me talk about this book, so I'm not going to dwell on it for too long. But I read Under the Duvet by Marian Keyes. Marian Keyes is a really well-known, I guess, contemporary women's fiction writer. This is a collection of her sort of journalism, newspaper columns, essays. Some of them have been published before, some of them were published in this collection for the first time. Most of them were written in the late 1990s and very few of them the early 2000s. And they're about a variety of different topics from Marian's life. So what I would say is that if you aren't a fan of Marian Keyes already, you probably wouldn't like this book, or you wouldn't find much of interest in this book. But if you are a fan of her novels, then I would definitely recommend picking up these as well. They were a lot of fun, and I listened to this one on audiobook, and Marian narrates it herself, and she just has the most calming voice. Like, I love listening to her. This month I also read her latest novel, Grownups, and this was brilliant. I loved this. What I will say about Marian Keyes novels, or, you know, the two that I have read now, is that they are really long. Like, she probably could tie up her plots a lot quicker, but if you love her writing, then you just don't want her books to end. That's my experience of them anyway. Like, I could spend so long with her characters. I could have like an additional novel about one of her side characters and be so happy about it. This book follows the Casey brothers, but is really about the women in their lives more than it's about them. So really it's about like the wider Casey family. And this book begins when one of the wives is suffering from concussion and ends up like blurting out a lot of family secrets. Like, this is a family who on the surface look like they're always getting along, they're always having a great time, they're always having dinner parties and going on trips, going on holiday together, but there's a lot of like drama and tension below the surface. And while this book is a lot about like drama and affairs, Marian Keyes does an excellent job of having very serious topics dealt with alongside these kind of domestic family dramas. So this book deals with the refugee crisis, it deals with period poverty, it deals with homelessness in Ireland, and the intersection of all three of those things. I think she does a fantastic job of balancing those very serious topics with the kind of scandalous drama. I just love her writing so much, and I think even for people who aren't that into contemporary women's fiction or don't think they are, Marian Keyes may be the one that gets you into this genre. Sticking with some contemporary fiction, I read Holding by Graham Norton. This is another one that I spoke about in my reading vlog. So this is a cosy crime that is set in Duneen in Cork, and it follows what happens with Sergeant PJ Collins after a body is discovered at the local farm. Now, this sergeant is kind of used to dealing with very like low-level small crimes. So this situation he finds himself in, he's just so out of his depth, and when other police officers, or guards as we call them in Ireland, get involved in the case, he definitely finds himself like floundering and not knowing what to do, and I found that dynamic really enjoyable to read about. I don't want to reveal the mysteries in this book, but I would say none of them are shocking. I think especially if you know a little bit about Irish history. But I think the reveals of them are done really sensitively and really well. And I think where this book's real strength is the characters. Like, the characters feel so real. They feel so genuine, like they feel like people that actually exist. That's such a huge thing for me in books. Like, if I can't believe that someone's real, like if you definitely get the sense that this person wouldn't actually exist. This person is definitely like an exaggeration or a figment of the author's imagination. I don't really get on with that so much, but these characters feel so genuine. I think it's a really good novel. It's not necessarily in the genre that I really enjoy reading, but I can definitely see the merit in this writing. I also read Days Without End by Sebastian Barry, another book that I spoke about in my reading vlog. This book follows two young men who sign up for the US Army in the 1850s, and it follows their experiences of war and the really traumatic experiences that they go through, and the way the writer draws attention to those moments is so like beautifully done. I think he's done a fantastic job of exploring the impacts of war but without sensationalizing them. This book also explores gender roles and sexuality, which I feel like are things that are kind of underlying in a lot of books that I've read about war. So it was really great to see those elements of the story come like more to the forefront. It is beautifully written, but the word I would really use to describe this novel is compassionate. Like, this is such a compassionate novel. If you like historical fiction, and like I'm quite reluctant to read historical fiction sometimes, like I'm not gonna lie to you, it's not really like massively my thing, but I thought this was really well done. If you like historical fiction and you haven't picked this one up yet, you really should. As I mentioned earlier, I also reread Normal People by Sally Rooney. Because this is a reread, I'm not going to talk about it too much, but this essentially follows the relationship between two characters, Connell and Marianne, who go to secondary school together. Their lives are very different. So Connell is like really popular at school, whereas Marianne kind of blends in. She's not massively popular, but Marianne is also from a far more like affluent family than Connell, and Connell's mother actually cleans Marianne's house, and because of that they have like these moments where they're spending time together when Connell goes to pick his mother up. And their relationship gradually becomes more complicated from there. And then we follow them through the next few years of their lives as they go off to college or university, and things kind of flip. Suddenly, Connell is a bit of a outcast country boy, whereas Marianne is like quite popular at university. But these two characters find themselves repeatedly drawn back to one another. They get in and out of relationships with other people, but they always find themselves going back to one another, and they have dreadful communication skills. I think this is a novel that you bring a lot of yourself to, and when I read it the first time, I did bring a lot of myself to it and empathized like with these characters because of like my own experiences that I've gone through. But even it being like a couple years since I read this book, maybe a little bit less, I felt like I brought totally new experiences to this novel, and I loved rereading it. I'm so glad that I did. Another contemporary book I read this month was Strange Hotel by Emer McBride. I really loved Emer's previous novels, A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing and The Lesser Bohemians, and I was unfortunately left kind of disappointed by Strange Hotel. This is about a woman going in and out of various hotel rooms in her life and occupying these liminal spaces and finding herself not only being in these physical liminal spaces, but she's also mentally in a liminal space. She doesn't really know where she's at, and this novel is very stream of consciousness, which I knew it would be from reading her previous novels, but it's also far more introspective than her previous two. It's far more ambiguous. There is far less of a plot. I feel like our main character's life is never actually explained. Like, we never actually know that much about her, and it stops her from feeling tangible and real, which, you know, I just spoke about is something that can really stop me from getting on with a novel. Like, she didn't feel like a real person. I don't really know what more to say about this book. It's just a matter of personal taste, and I can tell like it is really well written, but sort of the aspects that I enjoyed less about her previous books were really ramped up in this novel, and the things that I really, really loved about her previous books fell by the wayside. I just didn't really like it that much. I also read Girl by Edna O'Brien. I'd read a few of her books before, and I really enjoy her writing. And this book was really well written. This book... So in 2014, 276 girls were abducted from their school by a terrorist organisation in Nigeria. The author went to Nigeria and spoke to some of the survivors, and essentially this book is a fictionalised account of their cumulative experiences. I do think this book is really well written. I think it is so harrowing. What happened to these girls is so heartbreaking and dreadful, and the author really does this in a visceral way, but I have such difficult feelings about this book, because no matter how much the author has researched this, she will never understand the experiences of these girls. And I'm not saying like the only person who can write about this experience is the girls that went through it, but I feel like this author just fundamentally, she doesn't even have an understanding of what it's like to be a young woman in Nigeria, never mind, you know, this dreadful experience. So far from own voices. Like, I feel slightly uncomfortable about this novel, and I think that's all I'm going to say about it, I think. I also read 2 short story collections in March. The first of those was Show Them a Good Time by Nicole Flattery. What's really interesting about these short stories is that on the surface they would kind of seem like they are realism, but there are like these very uncanny moments in them where you're not entirely sure what's going on. And I think what Nicole Flattery does really interestingly in these stories is the subjects that should be treated, or you would expect to be treated in a very serious way, she treats with a lot of humour. And I would say these stories have a lot to do with performances, how we perform our own identities, how our identities shift depending on what situation we're in, what people we're with, how everything is a performance, everything is a show. They're very quirky, and you do kind of have to just suspend your disbelief for some of them. They're quirky, they're eccentric. I did enjoy them. I'm not sure I fully understood all of them, but I did enjoy them. I also read Kissing the Witch by Emma Donoghue, which is a collection of fairy tale retellings that have the fairy tales kind of refocused on the women in quite a feminist way and retell them in quite interesting way. I really enjoyed this collection. I love fairy tale retellings. I love trying to figure out what fairy tale is being retold. What's done really well in this collection is that even though they are individual short stories, they all like link to one another. And I think the way that was done was just really, really fun. If you like fairy tales, if you like feminism, if you like Emma Donoghue's writing, it's a great book. Very quickly, I'm going to gloss over this next book because I read Dante and the Lobster by Samuel Beckett, and quite frankly, I didn't get it. This is a short story that has something to do with a man preparing a lobster and something about an Italian lesson. Has anyone else read this? I don't get it. And I was so disappointed by that because I'd read Waiting for Godot, one of his plays. I think it's probably his most well-known play, I guess. And I was going to watch another of his plays, Endgame. I was going to watch the theatre production of it that had Daniel Radcliffe in it, but unfortunately that was cancelled. But this, I just didn't, I didn't get it. I don't know what more to say, I just didn't get it. And the final book I'm going to talk about is the poetry collection I read in March, and that was Mary O'Malley's Playing the Octopus. This is a collection of poems that is very much about kind of the natural world, but particularly on the west coast of Ireland, and it's very evocative of that landscape. But it's also about the east coast of America, and I found that parallel really interesting. I'm not really someone that reads a lot of nature poetry, but I did find something of value in this, and I find myself reading a lot of books about Ireland, but not really about the West Coast so much, so I really enjoyed reading that perspective in this book. This book also has a lot to do with mythology and also like motherhood and femininity, the relationships between all of those things. It has a real dreamlike quality to it, which I really enjoyed, and it also has a real like lyrical, musical quality to it as well. Overall, I did really think this was a strong collection. So that is it. These are the books, plus quite a few more that I read in the Irish Readathon. As ever, they will be all linked in the description if you want to find out more about them. Do leave me a comment down below and let me know if you've read any of them. We can share thoughts on them. And I just want to say thank you again to everyone who participated in the Irish Readathon. I am so grateful. And if you did participate in the readathon, let me know which book you enjoyed reading the most. I'd love to have a chat with you down in the comments. I hope you guys are keeping safe and well, and I will talk to you in my next video.